You know, they say that once you make it, once you reach a certain level of success and put on a three-piece suit that costs more than some people's first cars, the world is supposed to start looking at you differently. They tell you that money is a shield and that power is a universal language. But let me tell you something, my friend. Sitting here today as a man who has built companies from the dirt up, the higher you fly, the thinner the oxygen gets for people who look like me. Sometimes, the higher you climb, the more people want to see you fall. Or worse, they want to pretend you aren't even there. I was heading out of Reagan National on a Tuesday. It was one of those humid mornings where the air feels like a wet wool blanket pressing against your chest. I had a board meeting in Los Angeles that was going to decide the fate of a 3-year merger. I'm talking about a deal with enough zeros to make your head spin. I was tired. Man, I'd been up since 4 in the morning reviewing spreadsheets and legal briefs. My eyes were burning. My back was stiff. And all I wanted, all I truly needed, was to get into that first-class cabin, put my head back, and disappear for 5 hours. I remember walking through the terminal, my leather briefcase heavy in my hand. I felt good, though I was wearing a charcoal gray suit, tailored sharp, shoes polished to a mirror shine. I carry myself a certain way, shoulders back, head up. My father taught me that. He was a man who spent 40 years working in a factory, and he told me, "Marcus, don't ever give them an excuse to look down on you. You dress for the life you want, and you hold your ground like you own the soil you're standing on." When I reached the gate, I saw the line for Group 1. I stood there, leaning against my suitcase, just breathing. I looked around at the other travelers, the lobbyists in their navy blazers, the tech kids in their expensive hoodies, the families heading on vacation. It's funny how you can be in a crowd of hundreds and still feel like you're under a microscope. I could feel the glances. Not the "I recognize him" glances, but the "why is he in this line" glances. You know the ones. They don't say it out loud, but their eyes linger just a second too long on your boarding pass. Before I go any further into what happened on that plane, I want to ask you something. I want you to really think about this. Have you ever been in a place where you did everything right, where you earned your seat at the table, but the moment you sat down, everyone else acted like you were a trespasser, like you'd stolen the chair? If you've ever felt that weight on your shoulders, let me know in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, because I need to know there are people out there who understand that it's not just about the incident. It's about the soul-crushing exhaustion of having to prove your humanity every single day. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, because we're going to talk about some truths that people usually like to keep buried. Anyway, they called Group 1. I scanned my pass. The machine gave that little green beep, and I walked down the jet bridge. That's usually the moment I start to relax. That bridge is like a tunnel to a quiet place. But the second I stepped onto that aircraft, the air changed. The lead flight attendant was standing there at the galley. Let's call her Elena. She was mid-40s, hair pulled back into a bun so tight it looked painful, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a corporate smile, the kind they teach you in a manual. She was greeting the 2 gentlemen ahead of me, 2 white men in business casual. "Welcome aboard, sir," she said, her voice like honey. "Right this way. Can I take your coat? We'll have a pre-flight beverage ready for you in just a moment." Then it was my turn. I stepped up, offering a polite nod. "Good morning," I said. My voice is deep, resonant. I make sure to speak clearly. I've learned that a threatening voice is often just a black man speaking with confidence. so I keep it measured. Elena didn't say, "Welcome aboard." She didn't offer to take my coat. Her smile didn't just fade, it vanished. It was like someone had flipped a switch and the power went out. She looked at my face. Then her eyes dropped to my hands, searching for my boarding pass, like she was looking for a fake ID at a bar. "Ticket," she snapped. "Just one word." "No, sir." "No, please." I held it out. "I'm in 1A, I said, trying to keep the tone light. She took the paper from my hand. Didn't just take it. She plucked it like it was something dirty. She stared at it for a long time, longer than she had for the guys in front of me. She looked at the seat number, then back at me, then back at the ticket. "This is first class," she said. It wasn't a statement of fact. It was a question. "I know," I replied. "That's why I bought the ticket." She didn't move. She stood there, blocking the aisle. "I need to verify this with the manifest." "Step to the side, please, so the other passengers can board." My heart did a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. The other passengers were right behind me. I could hear them shuffling their feet, the quiet sighs of impatience. I felt that familiar heat rising up the back of my neck. It's a heat that comes from a mixture of embarrassment and a very old, very tired anger. But I did what I always do. I stayed professional. I stepped into the little nook by the galley, feeling the eyes of everyone passing me by. I saw the two men she'd just greeted looking back over their shoulders. I saw a woman clutching her purse a little tighter as she walked past. I waited. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Elena was busy now, smiling again, ushering more people into the back of the plane. She was too busy to look at the man she'd just told to stand in the corner. Finally, she turned back to me, her face a mask of cold indifference. "Fine," she said, handing the ticket back without looking at me. "Go ahead, but keep the aisle clear. We have a full flight." I walked to 1A. It's the bulkhead seat, the one with the most leg room, the one I specifically chose so I could work. I set my briefcase down and took my seat. I tried to shake it off. "Don't let her ruin your day. Marcus," I told myself, "you have a merger to finish. You have a legacy to build. She's just a person with a small mind in a big world." But the cabin was quiet. You know that first-class quiet? It's supposed to be peaceful. But right then, it felt heavy. I pulled out my laptop, trying to focus on the slides for the meeting. A few minutes later, Elena came through the cabin with a tray of orange juice and champagne. She stopped at 1B. The man there, a younger guy with a Silicon Valley vibe, took a mimosa. "Thanks. Appreciate it," he said. She chirped back a "You're very welcome. Enjoy the flight." Then she turned to 1C. Same thing. A polite exchange. A cold drink. A moment of connection. Then she got to me. I looked up, expecting the tray to be lowered. I was thirsty. My throat felt like it was full of sand from the D. C. Heat. I reached out a hand. Just a small gestures to show I was ready. Elena didn't stop. She didn't even slow down. She walked right past 1A like the seat was empty. She didn't look at me. She didn't offer a drink. She just kept moving toward the back of the first-class cabin, her heels clicking on the floor like a countdown. I sat there, my hands still slightly raised in the air. I felt the sting of it. It wasn't just about the juice. It's never just about the juice. It's about the erasure. It's the way she decided, in her mind, that I didn't exist, or that I didn't deserve the basic courtesy afforded to every other person in those leather seats. I looked over at the guy in 1B. He saw it. He looked at me, then looked down at his drink, then looked away. He didn't want to get involved. Nobody ever wants to get involved when the air gets thick like that. They just want to get to their destination and pretend they didn't see the man in the charcoal suit being treated like a ghost. I waited until she came back up the aisle with the empty tray. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get aggressive. I just waited until she was level with my row and I cleared my throat. "Excuse me," I said. She stopped, but she didn't turn her body toward me. She just tilted her head slightly. "Yes, I think you miss me," I said, forced a smile that felt like it was cracking my face. "I'd love some water when you have a moment, or the orange juice." She turned then. She didn't look at my face. She looked at my laptop, then at my briefcase on the floor. Her lip curled, just a tiny bit. "I served the manifest," she said, her voice dropping into a low, sharp tone that was meant only for me. "And right now, the manifest is still updating. I can't serve drinks to passengers whose security clearance hasn't been confirmed by the gate." I blinked. "Security clearance. I've been sitting here for 10 minutes. My ticket was scanned. I'm a million-miler with this airline. I don't care if you're the king of Sheba," she whispered, leaning in just enough so that I could smell her perfume, something floral and sickly sweet. "I know a problem when I see one. You're making the other passengers uncomfortable with your attitude. Now, if you want to stay on this flight, I suggest you shut that laptop, put your head back, and don't say another word to me." She didn't wait for a response. She turned her back on me and walked toward the cockpit. I sat there, the blood rushing in my ears, the sound of the jet engines beginning to whine in the distance. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, not because I was scared, but because I was vibrating with a rage so deep it felt like it was part of my DNA. I thought about my father. I thought about every boardroom I'd ever sat in where I had to be twice as smart and 3 times as polite just to be heard. And then I saw her. Elena was standing by the cockpit door, talking to the co-pilot who had stepped out for a second. She pointed a finger back toward the cabin. She didn't point at the cabin in general. She pointed directly at seat 1A. She said something to him. Her face contorted into a look of genuine fear. A fake, manufactured fear that I'd seen 1,000 times before. The co-pilot looked at me, his brow furrowed, his hand resting on the doorframe. I realized then that this wasn't going to be a flight where I just didn't get my drink. This was going to be something else. The tension in the cabin had reached a breaking point, and I was the only one who didn't know the rules of the game we were playing. I reached into my pocket and felt the cold, hard surface of my phone. I wasn't going to call for water anymore. I slowly gripped the armrest, my knuckles turning white against the dark leather. As I watched Elena whisper something into the co-pilot's ear while keeping her eyes locked onto mine, that co-pilot's eyes didn't just look at me. They appraised me. It was the kind of look a hunter gives a cornered animal, calculating the risk, measuring the threat. He wasn't looking at a CEO who had just been featured on the cover of Fortune. He wasn't looking at a man who provided jobs for over 500 families. He was looking at a situation. He nodded slowly at whatever poison Elena was pouring into his ear, his face hardening into that granite expression of authority that usually precedes a disaster. He stepped back into the cockpit, and the door clicked shut with a sound that felt as final as a prison cell door. I felt a cold sweat prickling at my hairline, despite the blast of the air conditioner above me. My mind started racing through 1,000 different scenarios, each one worse than the last. You see, when you're a man of my background, you don't have the luxury of assuming things will work themselves out. You've been trained from birth to know that things usually work themselves against you. I looked down at my hands again. My father's words came back to me. echoing from a dusty porch in Georgia 30 years ago. He used to sit there every Sunday, polishing his one pair of good leather shoes until they shone like glass. I remember asking him once, "Population, why you spend so much time on those? You only wear 'em for 2 hours at church." He didn't even look up. He just kept rubbing that cloth in small, perfect circles. He said, "Marcus, these shoes aren't for the Lord. The Lord knows my heart. These shoes are for the world, because the world is looking for any reason to call you lazy, or dirty, or less than. You make sure your shoes are so bright they can see their own prejudice reflected in them." I had followed that advice my whole life. I had built a suit of armor out of degrees, titles, and a bank account that most people can only dream of. But as I sat in that leather seat, feeling the silence of the cabin grow heavy and suffocating, I realized that my armor was paper thin. To Elena, and now to that co-pilot, I was just a disruption in the seamless flow of their standard day. I was the dark spot on a white canvas. I tried to focus back on my laptop, but the words on the screen were just blurry lines of light. I could feel the man in 1B watching me. Let's call him Tyler. He had been quiet this whole time, sipping his mimosa and scrolling through some tech blog on his phone. But now, he leaned over slightly, the scent of his expensive cologne wafting into my space. "Hey, man," he whispered, "you might want to just, take it down a notch." I turned my head slowly to look at him. "Take what down a notch?" "Exactly." Tyler shrugged, looking uncomfortable. The vibe. You're being a bit intense. She's just doing her job. And the more you push, the longer we're going to be sitting here at the gate. Some of us actually have places to be." I felt a sharp, bitter laugh bubble up in my throat, but I choked it back. Intense. That's the word they use when they don't want to use the other ones. Intense. Aggressive. Intimidating. I was sitting perfectly still. My voice hadn't gone above a conversational hum, and I was the one being intense. Meanwhile, Elena had been treating me like a criminal for 20 minutes. "Tyler, is it?" I asked, keeping my voice smooth as silk. "I've been sitting here minding my own business." I asked for a drink. I asked why my ticket was being questioned. If that's intense to you, I wonder how you'd handle someone actually being rude. He rolled his eyes and turned back to his phone. "Whatever. Just don't get us kicked off the flight. I have a keynote to give." See, that's the thing about people like Tyler. To them, the world is a series of minor inconveniences that can be solved with a polite complaint or a checkbook. They don't understand that for some of us, an inconvenience can turn into a life-altering event in the blink of an eye. They have the privilege of being individuals. I didn't have that privilege. In that moment, I wasn't Marcus. I was a representative of every fear, every stereotype, and every bias Elena had ever harbored. Before I go any further, I want to talk to you for a second. Yeah, you, sitting there watching this or listening to this. Have you ever felt that? That feeling where you realize you're being blamed for the very things being done to you. It's like being punched and then being told you're being too loud when you groan in pain. If you've been there, if you've had to swallow your pride just to survive a Tuesday, drop a "stay strong" in the comments. Let's build a little community here, because the world is cold. And sometimes all we have is each other's stories to keep us warm. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. This story is just getting started. And I promise you, you aren't going to believe where it goes. Back to the plane. The cabin lights flickered, and the hum of the auxiliary power unit seemed to drop in pitch. Usually, that's when the engines start to roar. But instead, the intercom crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. A voice boomed. It was deep, authoritative, and completely devoid of warmth. We're having a bit of a delay here at the gate. We've had a report of a security concern in the forward cabin. We're working with ground security to resolve the issue as quickly as possible. In the meantime, we ask that everyone remain in their seats with their seatbelts fastened. Cabin crew, please secure the doors and take your stations. The click of the seatbelt sign followed. A ripple of whispers went through the plane. People in the back were stood up, trying to peer over the seats to see what was happening in first class. Elena was back now, but she wasn't serving drinks. She was standing at the front of the aisle, her arms crossed over her chest, staring directly at me. She didn't look scared anymore. She looked triumphant. She had successfully turned me into a security concern. I felt that heavy heat I mentioned earlier, the one that starts in your stomach and works its way up to your throat. It's the heat of 1,000 injustices, the heat of my grandfather having to walk on the other side of the street, the heat of my mother being told she couldn't try on a dress in a boutique. It's an ancestral heat, and it's dangerous. It makes you want to scream. It makes you want to stand up and demand to be seen. But I knew better. I knew the rules of the game. If I stood up, I was a threat. If I raised my voice, I was a threat. If I even looked too angry, I was a threat. So I did the only thing I could do. I sat perfectly still. I placed my hands flat on my thighs, palms down. I looked straight ahead, focusing on the back of the seat in front of me. I became a statue. Inside, I was screaming. I was thinking about the irony of it all. I was flying to Los Angeles to finalize a deal that would literally keep a struggling airline, not this one, but a competitor, from going bankrupt. I was one of the most powerful black men in tech, and here I was, being treated like a stowaway who had crawled into the luggage bay. The door to the aircraft hissed as it was fully sealed. That sound. Man, it's different when you know you can't leave. It's not the sound of a journey beginning. It's the sound of a cage closing. I looked out the small window to my left. I could see the ground crew walking away. I could see the fuel truck pulling back. Everything was moving away from the plane, leaving us isolated on the tarmac. Then, I saw them. 2 vehicles, dark SUVs with flashing blue and red lights, pulled up onto the tarmac, stopping right beneath the jet bridge. My heart started hammering so hard I thought it would crack a rib. No, I thought. No, she didn't. She wouldn't go this far. But she did. Elena leaned toward the intercom phone by the galley and whispered something else. Then she walked over to me. She didn't stay back this time. She leaned down, her face inches from mine. You should have just moved when I asked you to verify your ticket, she hissed, her voice dripping with a terrifying kind of satisfaction. Now, it's out of my hands. Security is on their way up. I hope that million-miler status helps you in a holding cell. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on the seat back. I haven't done anything wrong, Elena. And you know it. It doesn't matter what I know, she replied. It matters what the captain believes, and he believes me. She stepped back as the jet bridge door opened again. The sound of heavy boots hitting the metal floor echoed through the cabin. The whispers in the back turned into dead silence. Everyone was staring now. Tyler in 1B was looking at the floor, suddenly very interested in his shoelaces. I saw the first officer, a tall man in a dark uniform with a security patch on his shoulder, step onto the plane. He was followed by a second officer. They didn't go to the cockpit. They didn't talk to the captain. They walked straight to row 1. I felt the entire cabin tilt, not physically, but the whole world seemed to lean in my direction, like I was the center of a black hole. I looked at the lead officer. He was a big guy, eyes hidden behind dark aviators even inside the cabin. He looked at Elena, who pointed a trembling finger at me. A performance worthy of an Oscar. "That's him," she said, her voice shaking now, playing the victim to perfection. "He's been aggressive. He's refusing to follow crew instructions, and he's made multiple verbal threats. Liars are a special kind of evil, aren't they? Especially the ones who know the system will believe them because of the color of their skin." She knew those officers wouldn't ask for my side of the story. She knew that in the eyes of the law. Her word was gold and mine was lead. The lead officer stepped into my personal space. He didn't ask for my name. He didn't ask for my ticket. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stand up slowly and keep your hands where I can see them," he said. His voice was like a gravel road. I looked up at him. I tried to find a spark of humanity in those aviators, but all I saw was my own reflection. Small, distorted, and powerless. "Officer," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I'm a first-class passenger. I've been seated here peacefully since I boarded. This flight attendant has been harassing me since the moment I stepped onto this aircraft. I have witnesses." I looked over at Tyler. I looked at the woman in 1C. They both looked away. They wouldn't meet my eyes. The witnesses had suddenly gone blind. I said, "Stand up." The officer repeated, his hand moving to the holster at his hip. It was a subtle movement, but it was a loud message. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This was it. This was how it happened. A misunderstanding. A lie, a nervous officer, and a man who just wanted a glass of orange juice becomes a headline. I thought about my kids. I thought about my wife, waiting for me to call her when I landed. I thought about all the work I'd done to prove I belonged in this world. I started to stand, slowly, very slowly. I kept my palms open, my fingers spread. Every muscle in my body was tight, ready for a blow that I knew I couldn't return. "Keep 'em up," the second officer barked, moving behind me. I felt the eyes of the entire plane on me. I could hear someone in the back recording on their phone. I could hear the faint sound of a child crying. I felt like I was being stripped naked in front of a stadium full of people. The dignity I had spent 50 years cultivating was being torn away, layer by layer, by a woman who didn't even know my name. As I stood there in the narrow aisle, flanked by 2 armed men, Elena stood behind them with a smirk that she didn't even try to hide anymore. She thought she had won. She thought she had put me back in my place. But as the officer reached for my arm to lead me off the plane, I felt a strange kind of calm settle over me. It wasn't the calm of surrender. It was the calm of a man who realized that if he was going to be treated like a security concern, he might as well use the tools he had worked so hard to acquire. "Officer," I said, pausing just before he could grab me, "before you take me off this aircraft and ruin your career along with hers, I have one request. It's my legal right to make one business call before being detained, and I suggest you let me make it right here, while the captain is listening." The officer hesitated. He looked at Elena, then at the cockpit door. He saw the sweat on my brow, but he also saw the cold, hard steel in my eyes. He saw a man who wasn't acting like a criminal. He saw a man who was acting like he owned the plane. "Make it quick," he grunted, stepping back just an inch. I didn't reach for a lawyer. I didn't reach for a friend. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over a contact that I had only used twice in my life. I looked Elena dead in the eye. The smirk on her face began to falter, and I pressed call. holding the phone up so the entire first-class cabin could see the name flashing on the screen. I stood there, the silence in the plane so absolute you could hear the tick of a wristwatch, waiting for the person on the other end to pick up. The ringing sound from my phone felt like it was being amplified through the aircraft's PA system. It was that steady, rhythmic pulse of a digital connection. Searching for a bridge, I held the device out, not tucked against my ear, but gripped in my palm like a piece of evidence. I wanted them to see it. I wanted the light from the screen to burn that name into their retinas. Jonathan Sterling, the man whose signature was on the paychecks of every person wearing a uniform on this plane. The man who had sat in my backyard 3 months ago, drinking expensive scotch and asking for my firm's help to digitize his entire fleet's logistics. Elena's eyes darted to the screen. I watched the realization hit her like a physical blow. That smirk, the one that had been curled so neatly into her cheek, didn't just fade. It curdled. She took a half step back, her hand fluttering toward the silk scarf at her throat, as if she were suddenly struggling for air. The two officers looked at each other, the bravado in their shoulders sagging just an inch. They knew that name. In this airport, that name was God. "Hello, Marcus. Is that you?" The voice came through clearly. It was a boisterous, gravelly tone, full of the easy confidence that comes with owning the sky. I hit the speakerphone button. I wanted the silence in first class to be the backdrop for this conversation. "It's me, Jonathan," I said. My voice was a flat line, devoid of the shaking anger that was trying to tear through my chest. "I'm sorry to bother you on a Tuesday morning. I know you've got a board meeting in 10 minutes. For you, never a bother. We still on for dinner in LA tomorrow. I got that table at Nobu locked in. What's up? Man, you sound formal." I looked at the lead officer. He had stopped reaching for my arm. He was standing perfectly still, his head tilted as he processed the fact that the man he was about to put in zip ties was currently being invited to dinner by his boss's boss. "I'm calling because I'm currently sitting in Seat 1A on Flight 1242, still at the gate at Reagan," I said, my eyes never leaving Elena's. "And I'm afraid I'm going to have to cancel that dinner. Jonathan, your lead flight attendant has decided that I'm a security risk. She's currently standing over me with 2 armed officers, claiming I've made verbal threats because I had the audacity to ask for a glass of water, and wonder why my ticket was being treated like a forgery." The silence on the other end of the line was the loudest thing I've ever heard. It wasn't the silence of a dropped call. It was the silence of a thunderstorm gathering its energy. You could feel the atmospheric pressure in the cabin drop. The passengers around me, the ones who had been looking away, the ones who had been whispering, were now frozen, their necks craned, their breaths held. "Say that again." "Marcus." Jonathan's voice came back, and the warmth was gone. It was replaced by a cold, surgical precision that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Who is standing over you?" "2 airport security officers and your lead attendant. Her name is Elena," I said, reading the silver plate on her vest. "She told me she didn't care if I was the king of Sheba, and that she knows a problem when she sees one. I'm being told to deplane in front of the entire cabin. I assume the next step is a holding cell." "Put her on," Jonathan said. It wasn't a request. It was an executive order. I didn't hand her the phone. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of touching my property. I simply stepped forward, the officers parting for me like I was the Red Sea, and I held the phone toward her face. "He wants to talk to you." "Elena," I said softly. Her face was the color of a fresh sheet of paper. Her hand was shaking so violently she had to tuck it behind her back. She leaned toward the phone, her voice cracking before she even got a word out. Hello. This is lead flight attendant Elena Miller. Elena. Jonathan's voice boomed from the speaker, echoing off the overhead bins. This is Jonathan Sterling. I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are to step away from Mr. Vance immediately. You are to tell those officers to stand down, and then you are to go into the galley, sit in your jump seat, and do not move until I tell you otherwise. Do you understand the words coming out of my mouth? Sir, first, he was being difficult with the manifest, and the crew's safety. Shut up. Elena. Jonathan snapped. I'd never heard him use that tone with anyone. It was the sound of a man watching a multi-million-dollar relationship go up in flames because of one person's bigotry. I am the manifest. Mr. Vance is my personal guest and a partner to this airline. If he doesn't stay on that plane doesn't leave the ground. Do I make myself clear? Yes. Sir, she whispered. A single tear escaped her eye, tracing a path through her heavy foundation. It wasn't a tear of regret. It was the tear of a bully who had just realized the person they were picking on had a much bigger stick. The lead officer didn't wait for her to finish. He tapped his radio. Dispatch. Stand down at gate B4. Issue resolved. It was a communication error. Moving out. He gave me a look, not an apology, but a nod of recognition. It was the look of a man who realized he'd almost stepped on a landmine. They turned and exited the aircraft, their boots thudding rhythmically on the jet bridge as they retreated. The cabin was still a tomb. Elena backed away from me, her eyes wide and glassy, and disappeared behind the blue curtain of the galley. The co-pilot, who had been watching from the cockpit door, looked at me, his face a mask of pure terror. He didn't say a word. He just ducked back inside and closed the door. I brought the phone back to my ear. I'm still here. Jonathan. Marcus. I am so sorry. There are no words for this. I'm calling the captain's private line right now. Don't move. I'm gonna fix this. You can't fix the look on their faces. John, I said, and for the first time, my voice wavered. You can't fix the fact that I had to call the CEO of an airline just to sit in a seat I paid for. This isn't about a drink anymore. I know it's not. Just give me 5 minutes. He hung up. I sat back down in 1A. My heart was still racing. A frantic staccato against my ribs. I felt a strange sense of exhaustion. It's the exhaustion that comes after you've had to fight a war just to take a nap. I looked over at Tyler in 1B. He was staring at me, his mouth literally hanging open. Man, he whispered, his voice trembling. First, I had no idea you knew Sterling. I'm so sorry about earlier. I just thought you thought exactly what she wanted you to think, I said, turning my head to look him in the eye. You saw a black man being questioned, and you assumed he was the problem. You didn't see a person. You saw a vibe. Remember that the next time you're giving your keynote on innovation, innovation starts with seeing the people right in front of you. He turned away, his face flushing a deep crimson. He didn't have anything else to say, but the drama wasn't over. Not by a long shot. About 3 minutes later, the cockpit door swung open again. This time, it wasn't the co-pilot. It was the captain himself. He was an older man, silver hair, 3 stripes on his sleeve, looking like he'd just seen a ghost. He didn't walk to the galley. He walked straight to my seat. Mr. Vance, he asked, his voice low and humble. Yes, I said, not standing up. I stayed seated. I wanted him to have to lean down to talk to me. I just got off the phone with corporate headquarters. I want to personally apologize for the conduct of my crew. We were given incorrect information regarding your behavior. By whom? Captain, let's be specific, I said. He swallowed hard. By the lead flight attendant. She claimed there was a threat. I should have come out myself. I should have assessed the situation. There is no excuse. So, what happens now? I asked. Are we going to Los Angeles? I have a meeting. The captain looked over his shoulder at the galley curtain, then back at me. The flight is currently under a ground stop by order of the CEO. We are being told to deplane the entire aircraft. A collective groan went up from the passengers who were listening in. People started shouting from the back. What? Why? I'm gonna miss my connection. This is crazy. The captain ignored them, focusing only on me. Mister, Sterling has ordered an immediate safety and conduct audit of this entire crew. We are being relieved of duty. A new crew is being bussed over from the hangar, but it will take at least an hour. And he hesitated. He has requested that I escort Elena Miller off this aircraft in front of the ground security team. I looked at the blue curtain. I could see the silhouette of Elena, sitting on her jump seat, her head in her hands. The power had shifted so completely that it felt like the plane itself had flipped upside down. I wasn't the one leaving. I wasn't the one in trouble. She was. I don't want to be the reason these people miss their flights. Captain, I said, I just wanted to be treated like everyone else. It's too late for that. Sir, the captain said, the order came from the top. We are grounding the flight until the toxic elements are removed. Those were Mr. Sterling's exact words. The intercom crackled again, but this time it was the captain's voice, and he sounded broken. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. Due to a severe breach of company policy and professional conduct, this flight is being temporarily grounded. We ask that all passengers deplane and return to the terminal. We will have a new crew and a new flight plan ready as soon as possible. We apologize for the extreme inconvenience. The cabin erupted. Anger, confusion, and shock flooded the air. But as I stood up to grab my briefcase, something else happened. The man in 1C, who hadn't said a word the whole time, an older man in a worn-out corduroy jacket who had been reading a law journal, stood up and blocked the aisle. He didn't look at the captain. He looked at me. Then he looked at the rest of the first-class cabin. I've been a federal judge for 30 years, the man said, his voice quiet but carrying a weight that silenced the entire front of the plane. And I have never seen a more blatant display of racial profiling in my life. I watched that woman treat this man like a vagrant from the second he stepped on board. I watched her lie to the officers. And I watched all of you sit there and let it happen. He turned to the captain. I'll be submitting a formal report to the FAA and the Department of Transportation. You didn't just have a communication error. Captain, you had a systemic failure of character. And I will make sure, Mr. Sterling isn't the only one who holds you accountable. The judge then looked at me and extended a hand. My name is Judge Arthur Vance, no relation. But I'd be proud to share a name with a man who carries himself with your dignity. If you need a witness for what happened before you made that call, I'm your man. I shook his hand. It was a firm, grounding grip. For the first time since I'd arrived at the airport, I didn't feel like I was fighting the world alone. The jet bridge door opened, and the same 2 security officers from before walked back in. But they weren't looking for me. They walked past seat 1A, past the judge, and went straight to the galley. I heard the sound of the curtain being ripped open, I heard Elena's sharp gasp, followed by the muffled sound of her sobbing. "Elena Miller, you're being escorted off the premises," the lead officer said. "Your employment status is under review, and we have a directive to remove your credentials immediately." I stood there, my briefcase in hand, as they led her out. She had to pass right by me. Her eyes were red, her makeup smeared, her uniform disheveled. She looked at me for a split second, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. But I didn't give her a look in return. I didn't need to. I just watched her go, a small, broken figure being marched down the jet bridge she had tried to use as a gallows for my reputation. As the rest of the passengers began to shuffle out, grumbling and staring at me with a mix of awe and resentment, I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I looked at the empty seat in 1A. I looked at the judge, who was waiting for me to lead the way out. "You okay, son?" the judge asked, his hand on my shoulder. I looked at the cockpit, where the captain was frantically trying to explain himself to someone on the radio. I looked at the silent, empty cabin that had felt like a cage just minutes ago. "I'm tired, Judge," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm just so tired of having to be a someone just to be a anyone." I turned toward the exit, my shoes clicking on the floor, the sound echoing through the hollowed-out plane as the last of the sunlight hit the windows, casting long, jagged shadows across the empty first-class seats. The air in the terminal didn't feel like the air on the plane. It was wide, echoing, and filled with the frantic energy of 1,000 people trying to get somewhere else. But for me, it felt like stepping into a cold shower after a long fever. I walked back up that jet bridge, the judge by my side, and I could feel the eyes of the deplaned passengers burning into the back of my charcoal suit. They were angry, man. They were furious. They'd been kicked off their flight, delayed by hours, all because of what they perceived as a disruption at the front of the plane. They didn't see the injustice. They only saw the inconvenience. But I didn't turn around. I didn't explain. I just kept my eyes on the flickering fluorescent lights of the gate area. You know, there's a specific kind of silence that follows a man like me when he wins a fight he wasn't supposed to start. It's not a respectful silence. It's a heavy, confused quiet, like the world is trying to figure out how the pieces of the puzzle shifted so fast. I reached the gate desk, and there was already a phalanx of suits waiting. Not airport security this time, but the fixers, the corporate men and women in their branded blazers, holding tablets and looking like they'd just been told the building was on fire. One of them, a VP of operations who had clearly been flown in or rushed over from a nearby office, stepped forward. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week, his tie slightly crooked. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice trembling just enough for me to notice. "I'm Sarah. I'm with the executive response team. Mr. Sterling is still on the line with our regional director. We have a private lounge secure for you and Judge Vance. There are no words for the failure that occurred today." I looked at him, and then I looked at the judge. Arthur was standing there, leaning on his cane, watching the VP with the kind of weary wisdom you only get from decades of seeing the worst of humanity from a mahogany bench. "Save the script," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the terminal noise like a blade. "I don't want a lounge. I don't want a voucher. I want to know that when the next man who looks like me walks onto one of your planes, he doesn't have to carry a CEO's phone number in his pocket just to get a glass of water." The VP nodded so hard I thought his glasses would fall off. "Understood, sir. Completely understood." The employee in question has been terminated effective immediately. The captain and co-pilot are under mandatory suspension, pending a full civil rights investigation. We are restructuring our entire implicit bias training module, starting tonight. It sounded good. It sounded like progress. But as I sat down in a quiet corner of the gate, away from the hovering executives, I felt a hollow thud in my chest. Revenge is supposed to taste sweet. Right. That's what the movies tell you. They tell you that when the bad guy gets escorted off in handcuffs or loses their job, you're supposed to stand up and cheer. But sitting there, watching the ground crew prepare a different aircraft for our departure, I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like a man who had just been reminded that my dignity was a fragile thing, held together by nothing more than a few digits on a screen and a powerful friend. I want to pause right here and ask you a real question. Because we're in this together now, you and me. Have you ever won a battle but felt like you lost the war? Have you ever stood up for yourself, gotten the apology, gotten the justice, but still went home feeling like a piece of your soul was left behind on the battlefield? If you're feeling what I'm saying, hit that like button, not for the drama, but for the truth of it. And tell me in the comments, how do you heal after the world tries to tell you that you don't belong? I'm reading every single one, because I think we all need a little bit of that collective healing right now. Arthur, the judge, sat down next to me. He pulled a silver flask from his coat, looked at it, then put it back. He smiled a little, a sad, knowing crinkle around his eyes. You're thinking about your father, aren't you? He asked. I looked at him, surprised. How did you know? Because men like us, Marcus, we never just carry ourselves. We carry the ghosts of every man who came before us and wasn't allowed to make that phone call. Your father didn't have a Jonathan Sterling. He had to swallow that pride and keep walking. You're feeling the weight of his silence. I leaned my head back against the cold glass of the terminal window. Outside, the sun was starting to dip toward the horizon, painting the runways in streaks of bruised purple and gold. He told me the suit was armor. Judge, he told me if I looked the part, they'd have to treat me like the part. He was half right. Arthur said softly, the suit is armor. But armor only works if the person looking at you recognizes the metal. To some people, they don't see the suit. They just see the man inside it, and they've already decided what that man is worth before he even opens his mouth. But let me tell you something I've learned from 30 years on the bench. The law can change a policy, but it takes a heart to change a culture. What you did today, you didn't just save your own seat. You put a crack in that culture. About an hour later, they called the new flight. It was a different plane, a different crew, and a completely different atmosphere. The new lead flight attendant, a woman named Maria, didn't smile the corporate smile. She looked me in the eye with a mixture of profound apology and genuine respect. Mr. Vance, she said as I stepped back onto the aircraft, it is an absolute honor to have you on board. If there is anything, and I mean anything, we can do to make this flight comfortable, please let me know. I thanked her and took seat 1A again. As the engines began to roar, that familiar vibration hummed through the floorboards. We taxied out past the spot where the SUVs had been parked. I looked out the window and saw the empty gate where the drama had unfolded. It looked so small from up here. Everything looks smaller when you're rising. I finally got my water. Maria brought it to me in a crystal glass, chilled, with a lemon wedge, before we even left the ground. She didn't check a manifest. She didn't ask for a ticket. She just served me. I took a sip. and the cool liquid felt like it was washing away the last of that heavy heat in my throat. I looked over at Tyler in 1B. He was still there, but he was different now. He was staring at his laptop, but he wasn't typing. Every now and then, he'd glance over at me, his eyes full of a strange, newfound caution. He realized that the man sitting next to him wasn't just a vibe. He was a force. I didn't talk to him. I didn't need to. Sometimes the best lesson you can give someone is simply to exist in your full power, right in their line of sight. The merger in Los Angeles went through the next day. I walked into that boardroom and I didn't mention the flight. I didn't mention the security or the phone call. I just did the work. I closed the deal with a handshake that felt like iron, because that's the real revenge, isn't it? Success. Not the kind of success that buys you a bigger car, but the kind that makes you undeniable. I'm telling you this story because I want you to know that your voice has power. Even when it feels like a whisper in a hurricane, I want you to know that you belong in every room you walk into and every seat you pay for. Don't let the Elenas of the world make you feel small. They are the ones who are small. They are the ones living in a tiny box of fear and prejudice, while you have the whole sky to fly in. Before I sign off, I want to leave you with one thought. My father's shoes are long gone, but I still polish mine every morning. Not because I'm afraid of what the world will think, but because I'm proud of the man who's standing in them. If this story moved you, if it gave you a little bit of strength for your own journey, please subscribe to the channel. We're building something real here. A place for truth, for strength, and for the stories that usually get left on the cutting room floor. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they are enough. And remember, the oxygen might get thin at the top, but the view is worth the climb. I'm Marcus Vance, and this was my story. I'll see you in the next one. Stay strong, stay proud, and keep your head held high. I close my laptop, lean my seat back as the plane leveled off at 30,000 feet. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself fall fast asleep in the quiet of the clouds.